The waiter had just set down a bottle of Cabernet when Julia cleared her throat. Not the usual delicate clearing she did before speaking in public, but a sharp, clipped sound, like she was slicing the air. I glanced up from my plate, expecting some kind of toast. 20 years of marriage, after all. 20 years of mortgages, vacations, arguments over thermostat settings, and inside jokes only we understood. Instead, her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I'm leaving you," she said, voice steady, almost rehearsed. "My lawyer will take it from here." The restaurant noise didn't stop. Silverware clinked against plates, low conversations hummed around us, laughter rippled from a nearby table. But my world went silent, compressed down to the faint metallic ring of my own heartbeat in my ears. I stared at her, waiting for the smirk, the punchline. Maybe she was joking. But Julia never joked like this. She was a planner, a strategist. Every move calculated 3 steps ahead, just like the chess games she used to play against me when we first started dating. And right now, her face was a blank slate, polished and impenetrable. She took a sip of her wine, watching me over the rim of her glass like she was measuring my reaction. No anger, no sadness, no theatrics, just clinical efficiency. A younger version of me might have sputtered, demanded answers, made a scene. But not now. Not after 20 years of learning exactly how she operated. I exhaled slowly, wiped my mouth with my napkin, and nodded. Just once. Then I reached for my wallet, pulled out my credit card, and slid it onto the check presenter without a word. Julia blinked. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, gone almost as soon as it appeared. She expected something else. A fight? Pleading? Maybe for me to storm out, knocking over a chair in the process? I gave her nothing. I leaned back, studying her the way a surgeon studies an X-ray before making the first incision. "Why now?" I asked finally. Not an emotional plea, just a question. She tilted her head. "Does it matter?" "Maybe." She exhaled sharply, barely hiding her impatience. "Mark, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Everything is already in place. My attorney will contact you tomorrow." My lips twitched at that. Her attorney, not ours. That told me 2 things. First, this wasn't sudden. She had been planning it for a while, waiting for the right moment. Second, she was confident, too confident. Like someone who knew they had the upper hand before the game even started. I let the silence stretch, watching her carefully. She wasn't wearing her wedding ring. That was the moment the gears in my head started turning. Not because of sentimentality. I wasn't the type to clutch my chest and weep over a missing ring. No, it was because Julia was methodical. She wouldn't take it off just for a dinner announcement. She had removed it long before tonight. How long? A week? A month? Longer? She lifted the glass to her lips again, but I noticed the slightest hesitation this time. Good. I took my time finishing my drink, then pushed back my chair. "I'll see myself out," I said. Julia's expression flickered, just for a second. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. I was supposed to ask questions, to demand explanations, to break. Instead, I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and left her sitting there, perfectly composed in that elegant restaurant, with a plate of untouched creme brulee in front of her. I stepped outside into the cold night air, inhaled deeply, and walked to my car. I wasn't driving home. I wasn't calling anyone. I was going straight to her lawyer's firm, because something about this didn't add up, and I was going to find out why. The hum of the engine filled the silence as I pulled onto the highway. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind wasn't. Thoughts snapped like live wires, flashing through my brain in chaotic bursts. Why now? The timing didn't make sense. If Julia wanted out, she had 100 quieter, easier ways to do it. Hell, she could have just waited until after dinner, sent me an email like a corporate layoff notice, and disappeared. But instead, she staged a scene. A performance. She wanted me to react. She wanted control. And that was what bothered me. Because she already had a prenuptial agreement in place. It was airtight, drafted by the best attorneys money could buy, her attorneys, not mine. And in that prenup, she had very limited financial leverage. If she wanted to keep her wealth intact, a quiet, cooperative split would have been her best move. Instead, she tried to bulldoze me. That meant something had changed. Something she wasn't telling me. I gritted my teeth and forced my thoughts into order. Had she met someone? Possible, but unlikely. Julia wasn't impulsive. She wouldn't throw 20 years away for an affair unless she had everything locked down first. Was she hiding money? Now that was a better question. My grip on the wheel tightened. I'd seen this before: big money divorces, messy financial separations, people trying to cut corners and hide assets before the hammer fell. I had never thought Julia would pull a move like that, but I also never thought she'd ambush me at a restaurant. I flicked on my turn signal and exited the freeway. The law firm was only 15 minutes away, sitting in one of those modern, soulless office buildings with a glass exterior and a lobby that smelled like overpriced coffee and bad decisions. I pulled into an empty spot and shut off the engine. For a moment, I just sat there, the dull hum of the city pressing in. I wasn't sure what I was walking into, but one thing was clear: Julia was counting on me to be blind and reactive. She wanted me confused. I stepped out of the car and adjusted my jacket. Too bad for her. I wasn't confused anymore. I was about to flip the script. The law firm's lobby was all polished tile and soft lighting, the kind of place designed to make clients feel like they were in good hands. A young woman sat behind the front desk, typing something into her computer. She barely glanced up when I approached. "Good evening, sir. Do you have an appointment?" I pulled in a slow breath, keeping my voice level. "I need to speak with Richard Graves." That got her attention. Her hands froze over the keyboard. She blinked up at me, eyes darting over my face like she was processing something she wasn't supposed to be seeing. I didn't like that. Not one bit. She licked her lips. "I'm sorry, who did you say you were?" My stomach did a slow, calculated turn. Something was off. I leaned forward slightly, watching her reaction as I said my name. "Mark Sinclair." The color drained from her face. She wasn't just surprised. She was rattled. And that told me exactly what I needed to know. They weren't expecting me. Which meant Julia never thought I'd come here. And more importantly, they had something to hide. The receptionist's fingers hovered over her keyboard like she wasn't sure whether to type something or press a panic button. I leaned against the counter, watching the war play out on her face. She knew something. Not just standard legal nonsense, something big. She swallowed, forced a smile that didn't quite land, and reached for the phone. Let Mr. Graves know you're here." I didn't move. I just nodded once. She turned away slightly as she spoke into the receiver, but I caught the shift in her tone. Low. Tense. Like she wasn't just delivering a message, she was warning someone. Less than a minute later, the office door at the end of the hall opened, and Richard Graves stepped out. I recognized him immediately. Not because we'd ever met, but because I knew the type. Tall, well-groomed, late 60s, but still clinging to the last threads of youth, with an expensive haircut and a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car. The kind of lawyer who had built a career out of burying people in paperwork until they suffocated under legal jargon and bad settlements. His eyes swept the room, expecting to see some nervous client. But when his gaze landed on me, he froze. For a second, just a split second, his whole body went rigid. Like a deer that just realized the headlights aren't moving. His face drained of color. Not surprise. Not confusion. Fear. That was my first confirmation that I wasn't just imagining things. His fingers twitched at his side before he smoothed them down his jacket like he was forcing himself to regain control. "Mr. Sinclair," he said, his voice measured, but just a hair too slow, like he was choosing each word carefully. "I wasn't expecting you." "No kidding." I pushed off the counter, straightening to my full height, and took a step forward. "I can tell." His lips parted slightly, like he was about to say something, but then he stopped. Instead, he exhaled sharply through his nose, turned toward the hallway, and gestured for me to follow. "Let's talk in my office." No argument. No fake pleasantries. Just a quick exit out of public view. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just about a divorce. This was about something bigger. And whatever it was, Richard Graves had just realized I was one step too close to figuring it out. Richard Graves led me down a long, sterile hallway lined with office doors, his footsteps just a little too fast, like he wanted to get me out of sight as quickly as possible. I followed without a word, watching the tension in his shoulders. Something was wrong. He knew something. And whatever it was, he hadn't expected to deal with it face to face. We stepped into his office, and he shut the door behind us with a quiet click. The space was as polished as I expected, dark with shelves lined with legal books, a massive mahogany desk, and a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He moved toward his desk, hesitated, then bypassed the high-backed leather chair and went straight to the filing cabinet in the corner. Not his computer. Not his briefcase. The filing cabinet. That meant whatever he was about to check wasn't digital. I leaned against the desk, crossing my arms, watching as he yanked open a drawer and flipped rapidly through a stack of folders. His hands weren't steady. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored file, dropped it onto his desk, and opened it. His gaze skimmed the first page, then the second. Then his jaw clenched. I saw it happen in real time. The exact moment when his entire understanding of the situation shattered. He swallowed hard, flipping another page. His lips parted slightly, like he was about to say something, then he stopped. No, not stopped. Froze. Like a man staring at the fuse of a bomb he didn't realize had already been lit. I didn't move, didn't blink. Just watched as his fingers tightened against the paper, crinkling the edges. Then, finally, his voice was low, almost disbelieving. This doesn't make sense. I pushed off the desk. What doesn't? He hesitated. I could feel it, the battle happening behind his eyes. He wasn't debating what to say, he was debating whether to say anything at all. I took another step forward, slow and deliberate. Tell me. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed again. Then, she can't file for divorce. The words hit like a bullet. I felt my pulse slow. Not speed up, slow. A sharp, controlled drop in my body's natural rhythm, like my entire system was recalibrating for something bigger. I narrowed my eyes. What do you mean, she can't? Richard exhaled sharply through his nose, dragging a hand down his face before flipping the folder around and pushing it toward me. I looked down. It wasn't Julia's divorce petition. It was a contract, signed by Julia. Years ago. My gaze scanned the document, and the more I read, the colder I felt. This wasn't a standard prenuptial agreement. It was something else. A legally binding document that specifically stated she forfeited the right to initiate a divorce. Not limited divorce claims. Not contingent financial clauses. She legally could not file for divorce. At all. I lifted my eyes to Richard. Explain. He let out a short, humorless laugh. I don't know. Wrong answer. His jaw flexed. He shook his head, flipping through more pages, his expression darkening with every line he read. This isn't standard, he muttered, almost to himself. This isn't something I would have approved. Who the hell? He stopped again, inhaled sharply, and snapped the file shut. When he looked at me again, his entire demeanor had shifted. Less rattled. More guarded. Like he had just realized how deep this rabbit hole went. I placed my hands on his desk, leaning in slightly. Start talking, Richard. His gaze flicked to the door, like he was checking for an exit. I smiled. Not a friendly one. Because I knew something now. Something that changed everything. Julia hadn't wanted this contract. She hadn't planned this divorce. Which meant someone else had. And I was about to find out who. I stared at the closed folder on Richard's desk, a quiet war raging in my head. Julia had signed away her right to file for divorce. Years ago. But she never told me. Not once. Not even in passing. And Julia wasn't the type to let legal matters slip her mind. Richard still wasn't talking. He had that look now, like a man who had just realized he was sitting on a live grenade and wasn't sure which wire to cut. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just let the silence stretch, pressing in on him like a weight. He cracked first. Richard exhaled sharply, running a hand through his graying hair before pulling the folder open again. This isn't just unusual, this is insane, he muttered, flipping through the pages like he was hoping to find something that made sense. I reached out and placed a single finger on the paper, stopping him. Start from the beginning, I said. My voice was steady, controlled. But inside, I was already pulling at the loose threads. His gaze flicked up to mine, hesitant. I lifted my chin slightly. You didn't draft this, did you? His jaw tensed. No. Then who did? Silence. His eyes dropped to the contract again, scanning the fine print. And then, after a few agonizing seconds, his fingers stilled. He squinted, leaning closer. No, that's impossible. What? He didn't answer. Just grabbed a pair of reading glasses from his desk, slid them on, and looked again. His lips parted slightly. Not shock. Recognition. And I saw it then, the exact moment realization hit. The color drained from his face again. This signature, he hesitated, then looked up at me. I suddenly guarded. Mark, this contract wasn't drawn up by anyone in this office. My stomach turned. Then where did it come from? He pressed his lips into a thin line, hesitating. Then, like he was forcing himself to rip off the bandage, he reached into his desk, pulled out a separate manila envelope, and slid it across the table. Look at the date, he said quietly. I didn't sit down. I just flipped it open and froze. The contract wasn't recent. It was over a decade old, dated 3 years after we got married. Before the house. Before the business started taking off. Before Julia's mother moved back into her life. My pulse thumped against my ribs. I flicked to the last page, my eyes locking onto Julia's signature. It was hers. Not forged. Not copied. She had signed this willingly. But why? Richard. My voice was lower now. Tighter. Who gave this to you? His fingers drummed once against the desk, then stopped. It was added to Julia's file 6 months ago. I lifted my gaze slowly. Added. I repeated. He nodded, his jaw clenching. It wasn't here before. Someone slipped it in. I inhaled once, sharp and controlled. Who? Another pause. Another second of hesitation. And then, finally, Julia's mother. The words hit like a hammer. The whole room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in. Julia's mother. The same woman who never liked me. Who always hovered in the background, pulling Julia's strings just tight enough to remind her she was still in control. And now? She was behind this too. I looked back at the contract, a slow realization unfurling in my mind like a noose tightening. This wasn't about a messy divorce. This wasn't even about Julia leaving. This was a setup, and I had just walked straight into it. I pushed the contract away like it was contaminated. My fingers curled into my palm, my jaw tightening as the reality of it settled like ice in my veins. Julia's mother. That name alone made my pulse hammer in a way nothing else had. That woman had been pulling strings in the background for years, nudging Julia in ways I never quite understood but always felt. But this was more than manipulation. This was a long game. I inhaled sharply, forced myself to focus, and looked Richard dead in the eye. If this contract was added 6 months ago, then you should have the financial disclosures, right? Richard blinked. What? I kept my voice even. Julia filed for divorce. That means she had to submit financial disclosures along with it. He hesitated. Too long. My stomach twisted. You do have them, don't you? A muscle in his jaw twitched. He pulled the folder back toward him, flipped through it, slower this time. Too slow. Page after page turned. His forehead creased. His expression darkened. And then his hands stopped. The folder went completely still. The silence stretched. Richard did not look at me. I exhaled, cold and deliberate. Richard. He closed the folder. They're missing. 2 words. But they confirmed everything. My pulse slowed. My body ran cold. This wasn't sloppiness. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. Divorce cases, especially high-stakes ones, required full financial disclosure. Every lawyer knew that. Every judge demanded it. And yet, in this case, Julia's case, there were none. Richard's fingers tapped once against the desk, like he was trying to steady himself. This isn't possible. This filing should have been rejected outright. I narrowed my eyes. Unless someone pushed it through. His throat bobbed. He knew I was right. I leaned in slightly. Who submitted the paperwork? He hesitated. Then, carefully, he reached for the corner of the folder and pulled out a single sticky note. I stared at it. One name. A scrawled signature at the bottom. And suddenly, the entire room seemed colder. Because it wasn't Julia's name. It was her mother's. I inhaled sharply through my nose, gripping the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles ached. Julia hadn't filed for divorce. Her mother had. Without the financial disclosures. Without legal standing. Without anything that made this process remotely valid. And somehow, it had still been pushed through. I lifted my eyes to Richard's, and for the first time, I saw it, real fear. Not fear of me. Fear of what this meant. Julia wasn't just hiding something. She wasn't the one in control at all. And whatever her mother was trying to cover up. It was big. Richard stared at the sticky note like it was a live grenade. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, trying to reconcile what we had just uncovered. A divorce filing without financial disclosures was illegal, but the fact that Julia hadn't even filed it herself? That was something else entirely. Someone had pushed this through. Someone with influence. Someone who thought they were untouchable. And at the center of it all, her mother. I clenched my jaw. Call the attorney who filed it. Richard hesitated. He wasn't a stupid man. He knew whatever was happening was bigger than a messy divorce. But he also knew I wasn't going to let this go. With a tight nod, he grabbed his desk phone, punched in an extension, and pressed the speaker button. The line rang once. Twice. Then, a voice crackled through. Male. Young. Nervous. Hello. Richard didn't waste time. Harrison, it's Richard. I need to clarify something regarding the Sinclair divorce filing. A sharp inhale. The faint sound of rustling paper. The pause that followed was just a second too long. Sir, Harrison's voice cracked. I don't have that case. Richard frowned. Excuse me. The rustling continued, faster this time. I mean, I didn't file it. I didn't draft any of the paperwork. Richard shot me a look. My stomach dropped. The young lawyer kept rambling. I remember seeing it on my desk, but I never signed off on it. I swear. The documents were already finalized when I got them. I just assumed. Richard cut him off, voice dangerously calm. You assumed what? Silence. A long, painful beat before Harrison whispered into the phone. I assumed Julia's mother handled it. The office went dead silent. Richard slowly leaned back in his chair. I exhaled through my nose, pressing my hands flat against the desk to keep them steady. Julia's mother didn't just influence this divorce. She executed it. Without Julia's knowledge. Without a legal right. Without any of the required paperwork. And somehow, she had still gotten it through the system. Richard's fingers drummed against the desk, once, twice, before he spoke again. Harrison, listen carefully. The kid swallowed audibly. Why, yes, sir. Who gave you the documents? Another pause. Then, she did. My stomach twisted. Richard rubbed his temple like he felt a migraine coming on. And you didn't think to it. I didn't question it. Harrison blurted. Sir, she said she was working directly with you. She had access to the files. She had the credentials. I didn't think. He trailed off, realizing exactly how deep he had just buried himself. Richard's voice went quiet. Cold. Harrison. A gulp. Yes, sir. You just admitted to an illegal filing. If anyone finds out about this, your career is over. Another long, awful pause. And then, in a broken whisper, I know. I leaned forward. Harrison. He startled. Why, yeah. I spoke slowly. Controlled. Did Julia ever approve this? The kid didn't answer. I could practically hear the blood draining from his face. I pressed harder. Did Julia even know? His voice cracked. Sir, a shaky breath. I don't think she did. Everything stopped. Richard closed his eyes, exhaling sharply. I stayed dead still, my heart hammering slow and heavy in my chest. Julia didn't file for divorce. Julia didn't even know she was getting divorced. So what the hell was her mother trying to pull? And more importantly, how far was she willing to go to keep it quiet? Richard's hand hovered over the phone after Harrison hung up, his knuckles pale against the receiver. The silence in the office was suffocating, thick with unspoken realizations. Julia didn't know. Her own mother had filed for divorce behind her back, forged documents, and somehow forced them through the system. This wasn't about a breakup. This wasn't even about control. It was something much, much bigger. I pushed off the desk, my voice coming out calm, measured, because if I let the storm inside me break free now, I'd tear this entire office apart. I need to see Julia's financial records. Richard blinked. His hand twitched like he wanted to adjust his tie, but thought better of it. Mark, I can't just. I leveled him with a stare. She's my wife. For a long second, he just stared at me. Then, without another word, he turned to his computer. The rhythmic clicks of his keyboard filled the air. Faster. More erratic. He was sweating now, his fingers moving too quickly for a man who was simply pulling up a standard account summary. Then he stopped. His shoulders stiffened. I stepped closer. What? Nothing. No blinking. No movement. Just Richard staring at the screen like he had just seen a corpse sit up. I moved around the desk and looked at the monitor, and my stomach dropped. Julia's accounts, her personal savings, investments, even the joint assets tied to her name, were empty. Not low, not mismanaged. Drained. Richard slowly exhaled through his nose, a look of pure disbelief tightening his jaw. Impossible, he muttered. His fingers flew across the keyboard, opening deeper logs, financial statements, historical balances. But it didn't matter. The numbers told the same story. Julia had been worth millions. Now, her balances barely totaled enough to cover a month's rent. I stared at the screen, my vision narrowing. When did this happen? Richard swallowed, clicking deeper into the transaction logs. His skin had taken on an unhealthy shade of gray. Over the past 6 months. The same time frame when Julia's mother slipped the contract into her file. Coincidence? Not a chance in hell. My pulse hammered against my skull. Where did it go? Richard licked his lips. His hand was shaking now. Most of it was transferred offshore. I clenched my jaw. To who? Click, click, click. His fingers danced across the keys, tracing the transactions, following the digital breadcrumbs. Then he stopped. His breath hitched. When he turned to me, his face was haunted. All the accounts are registered to your mother-in-law. The air left my lungs. This wasn't Julia's betrayal. It was her mother's. She had stolen everything. Manipulated the divorce, forged the filings, made it look like Julia was the one making these moves. All while gutting her daughter's life savings behind her back. And the worst part? Julia didn't even know. I inhaled sharply, my hands curling into fists. Julia wasn't my enemy. She was the next target. And she had no idea the knife was already at her throat. I didn't remember the drive home. 1 minute, I was in Richard's office, staring at the digital evidence of millions siphoned away into offshore accounts under Julia's mother's name. The next, I was gripping the steering wheel, the city lights blurring past as I cut through traffic like a blade. My mind wasn't racing anymore. It was set. This wasn't just about a divorce. It wasn't even about me. Julia had been betrayed just as much as I had. And if she didn't already know, she was about to find out. I pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. The house loomed ahead, dark except for the dim glow from the living room window. She was still inside. I stepped out of the car, every nerve in my body on edge, and made my way to the front door. I didn't knock. I walked in. Julia sat on the couch, her posture stiff, staring blankly at the coffee table. A nearly empty glass of wine sat next to a folded legal document. The same bullshit divorce papers her mother had forged. Her head snapped up the moment she heard me. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Not from anger. From guilt. She thought she had done something wrong. She had no idea. Mark. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying. I held up a hand. And for the first time in our entire marriage, she stopped talking immediately. I didn't sit. Didn't move closer. I just stood there, staring down at her as the truth boiled inside me. Tell me, I said quietly. What did she say? Julia blinked. What? Your mother. My voice was steady, but the rage underneath it was seething. What did she tell you? Julia swallowed hard. She looked away, her fingers twisting in her lap. She said she had proof. Proof of what? Her throat bobbed. That you. She hesitated. That you were hiding money. That you were setting me up to take the fall for tax fraud. That the prenup meant I'd get nothing, and I'd be ruined if I didn't file first. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. She had played Julia perfectly, manipulated her, fed her just the right amount of fear to make her believe that turning against me was her only option. It wasn't even Julia's fault. She had been coerced. I exhaled sharply through my nose, forcing my voice to stay controlled. And you believed her? Julia's eyes snapped back to mine, and for the first time, I saw it, realization. Like the walls of the lie her mother had built were finally starting to crack. I didn't want to. Her voice was barely above a whisper. But she had documents, Mark. Bank statements. Emails. She said she had a private investigator watching you. I let out a slow, bitter laugh. All fake. Her brows knit together. What? I stepped forward, finally closing the distance between us. Julia, listen to me. She's been planning this for months. She forged everything. She made sure the divorce was filed without your name on it because she didn't want you looking at the financials. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, opened the screenshots I had taken from Richard's computer, and turned the screen toward her. Because while she was telling you I was stealing money, I said, my voice low, she was draining your accounts behind your back. Julia stared. Her breath caught. Then she snatched the phone from my hand. Her fingers shook as she scrolled through the transactions. Offshore withdrawals. Shell companies. Her mother's name. I watched her expression shift. Shock. Then disbelief. Then horror. Her lips parted. No. No. She wouldn't. She did. I kneeled in front of her, gripping the armrest of the couch, forcing her to look at me. She set you up, Julia. She used you. She made you think I was the enemy while she stole everything from you. I paused, letting the words sink in. Then, lower, deadly quiet. And now that you have nothing left, she's trying to make sure you take the fall for it. Julia made a choked sound. Her hand clamped over her mouth as everything crashed down at once. The money, the lies, the divorce that wasn't even hers. Her body started shaking. Oh my God. And then, before I could say anything else, she shot up from the couch and grabbed her purse. My muscles tensed. Where are you going? She turned, eyes burning. Not at me. At her. To get some fucking answers. I exhaled, slow and controlled, then grabbed my keys. Not alone, you're not. Because this wasn't just about our marriage anymore. This was about war. Julia drove like she had a personal vendetta against the speed limit. The tires screeched as she pulled into the circular driveway of her mother's estate, if you could even call it that. The house was massive, perched on the edge of the city like a damn fortress. Gated entrance. Private security. The kind of place designed to keep people out. I barely had time to shut the car door before Julia stormed up the stone steps, her heels clicking like gunshots against the pavement. I caught up to her just as she threw open the front door without knocking. Mother! Her voice echoed through the grand entryway, bouncing off the high ceilings. A slow shuffle of footsteps. And then, there she was, Margaret Holloway, the woman who had spent 2 decades circling our marriage like a vulture, waiting for the exact right moment to sink her claws in. She emerged from the hallway with a crystal glass of whiskey in hand, draped in a silk robe like she'd been expecting us. And the moment her gaze landed on me, she smirked. Well, she took a slow sip. That was faster than I expected. Julia's hands curled into fists. You lying manipulative. Margaret held up a single finger, silencing her. Now, darling. No need for theatrics. Her eyes flicked to me, glinting with something too sharp. Your husband and I have quite a bit to discuss. I stepped forward, my voice cold. I know what you did. Margaret sighed, as if she were bored. You'll have to be more specific, dear. I took another step. The fake divorce. The missing millions. The offshore accounts under your name. I tilted my head. Want me to keep going? She chuckled. Like this was all one big joke. Oh, Mark, she murmured, swirling her drink. You always were a bit slow on the uptake. Julia's breath hitched beside me, like the gaslighting was so familiar, her body reacted before her mind could. But I wasn't Julia. I wasn't falling for it. I exhaled sharply through my nose. You stole from your own daughter. You forged her divorce filing. You're going to prison. Margaret took another sip, unbothered. You're right about one thing. I did forge the documents. Julia flinched like she'd been slapped. But I didn't move, because I could feel it coming. The real blow. Margaret set her glass down on the marble table beside her, folding her hands elegantly in front of her. But, my dear boy, she continued smoothly, I didn't steal from Julia. I felt Julia tense beside me. What? Margaret smiled. Cruel. Slow. Measured. I stole from you. The words landed like a gunshot to the ribs. I barely had time to process them before she walked over to a pristine white cabinet, pulled open a drawer, and tossed a folder onto the table. Go on, Mark, she purred. Take a look. I didn't move, because I already knew what was inside. Julia, though, she grabbed it, flipped it open. Her sharp inhale confirmed everything. She lifted wide, horrified eyes to mine. Mark, her voice was shaking. These accounts, these withdrawals. Margaret's voice cut in, silky and amused. All under his name. She framed me. She didn't just drain the money. She funneled it through accounts registered to me. She didn't just forge Julia's signature. She forged mine, too. She didn't just try to ruin our marriage. She set me up to take the fall for all of it. My name, my accounts, my signature. In the eyes of the law, I wasn't the victim. I was the criminal. I forced my jaw to stay locked, my hands steady. Margaret tilted her head, watching me like a cat who had just pinned a bird beneath its paw. You see, dear, she said softly, I wasn't just covering my tracks. She leaned in, her lips barely moving. I was making sure you never walked away from this. The world around me went silent. And for the first time in my life, I felt it. Cold, pure, unfiltered fury. Because Margaret thought she had won. But she had no idea who she had just gone to war with. I didn't react. Not in the way Margaret expected. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't grab the folder and start flipping through the evidence like some idiot seeing his own execution papers for the first time. I just smiled. A slow, measured, knowing smile. And Margaret's smirk faltered. Just a little. Just enough. Because I wasn't panicking. I wasn't begging. I was ready. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and with the press of a button, ended the recording. Margaret's entire body locked up. Julia gasped beside me. I turned the phone in my palm, tilting the screen toward the light. The recording was still open. The timer still sat at the 8-minute mark. Loud. Clear. Every word she had just said. The confession. The manipulation. The financial forgery. All of it. Margaret's face went stone white. Oops, I said casually. Looks like I hit record right around the part where you admitted to forging my name and siphoning the money through my accounts. A long silence. Then a shift. Margaret straightened, regained her composure. That sharp, deadly edge returned to her expression. You think that will hold up in court? She said smoothly, voice colder now. A recording without my knowledge? It won't be admissible. I shrugged. Maybe. But Richard doesn't need it for court. Margaret's lips parted. Just a fraction. She got it. I wasn't taking this to a judge. I was taking it to her own lawyer. And this was no longer about whether or not I could win in a legal battle. This was about leverage. Richard's firm had already been compromised. Harrison had admitted to an illegal filing. If Richard didn't handle this internally, his entire practice could be wiped out. I pocketed my phone. Well, this has been fun, I said lightly, patting my jacket. But I think I'll let Richard listen to this little conversation. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to hear how you forced his firm into felony territory. I turned to leave. But as I reached the door, Margaret laughed. Slow. Dangerous. I felt the hairs on my arms rise. She tilted her head, eyes glinting. You really think this is over? I didn't turn back. I already knew what she was going to say next. I heard the smile in her voice. I'm not the only one who wanted you gone, Mark. That was the final warning she gave me before I walked out of that house. And as Julia and I drove toward the law firm, the weight of her words settled like a loaded gun on my chest. Because Margaret had one last move left, and I had no idea who else was pulling the strings. Richard's face was gray. Sweat lined his temples. His hands trembled slightly as he took my phone and replayed the recording. 8 minutes. 8 minutes of Margaret Holloway's own voice, calmly confessing to fraud, forgery, and financial theft. I watched him listen. Watched the reality sink in. If this got out, his firm wouldn't just be scandalized. It would be annihilated. When the recording ended, he set the phone down, exhaled slowly, and rubbed his forehead. Jesus Christ. Julia sat across from him, silent, hollow-eyed, her fingers curled around her lap like she was holding herself together with sheer will. Shred the divorce filing, I said quietly. Erase it from existence. Richard swallowed hard. Then, after a tense pause, he nodded. I'll make a statement, he muttered. Internally, at least. We'll dissolve the filing, flag the fraudulent transactions. But Mark, he hesitated. If Margaret was willing to go this far, she's not done. People like her don't make just one move. I nodded. I knew. Margaret wasn't just playing a long game. She was playing a game with other people involved. She'd said it herself. I'm not the only one who wanted you gone, Mark. Which meant someone else was still lurking in the shadows. Richard sighed, reaching into his desk drawer for a file folder. And I think I know where to start looking. I frowned. What is that? His fingers hovered over the manila cover. "This file belonged to Julia's previous lawyer," he muttered. "The one she had before she switched over to my firm. He was a meticulous man, kept copies of everything." He flipped the folder open, and what I saw inside made my blood run cold. A marriage license. Not Julia's. Margaret's. Signed years ago. To a man I didn't recognize. I turned slowly to Julia, but her expression was just as shocked as mine. She had no idea. "She's been secretly married?" Julia's voice cracked. Richard nodded grimly. "And that changes everything." I gritted my teeth. "How?" "Because," Richard said carefully, tapping the license, "legally speaking, she was never allowed to have full control over your finances, Julia." The words slammed into the room like a grenade. Everything froze. Julia's lips parted. "What?" Richard exhaled sharply. "In this state, spouses are required to disclose their legal marriages, especially when handling financial matters on behalf of another adult." His gaze darkened. "Margaret never declared this marriage. She's been acting as your sole legal guardian in certain financial decisions, despite the fact that she wasn't even legally qualified," I finished. Silence. Heavy. Dense. And then Julia laughed. Not a happy sound. A bitter, horrified sound. "She's going to prison." I nodded slowly, a dark satisfaction creeping in. This wasn't just fraud. This wasn't just a financial crime. This was legal obliteration. Margaret had destroyed herself, and she didn't even know it yet. I reached for my phone and scrolled to one contact. One call. To a federal investigator. I hit dial. It was time to finish this. For good.